Welcome back to Public Policy. You have been immersed in simulated public policy advocacy and mediated, negotiated rulemaking. And those of you who elected the public policy advocacy track have been studying public policy advocacy from a macro complex systems perspective, including social movements, community organizing, media campaigns, really critical information for any peace builder who is passionate about any of the many public policy interests in the world today. Today, because you are involved, all of you, in micro negotiations, mediated, negotiated rulemaking, I want to review public policy advocacy at the micro level. Now, most of you have taken NCR 522 negotiation tactics. So you have already received education in effective negotiation, and I'm hoping your faculty taught you integrative as well as distributive bargaining. Integrative is the classic Harvard negotiation win-win. In your simulations, I am expecting all of you to be actively doing your best to reach the best of integrative, negotiated rulemaking. Oftentimes we think, oh, there's a mediator present, the parties can sit back and let themselves be educated, led, taken care of by the mediator. But you are empowered public policy advocates, negotiators. You have all been educated and trained in public policy negotiation. So I'm expecting you to be as actively involved in your simulations in demonstrating the best of your negotiation skill and NCRP education as I'm expecting the mediator to mediate. That means you're not relying on the mediator to do your interest analysis. You're doing interest analysis. Let me review those of you who did not take negotiation tactics with me or have not had a class where you've been introduced to Rackham's research of the best of negotiation. I want to quickly review those top skills. Now, for those of you who did not study his research, it was quite seminal because he studied not only from party satisfaction and inclusion, but from a sustainable quality agreement perspective. So he evaluated what I will be talking about probably next week. He evaluated based on whether that agreement stuck, not just based on whether an agreement was reached at the table and whether parties were happy at the table. He wanted to see if it actually made a difference and impact long term. And here's what he found. The best negotiators listen actively. They ask 2 to 3 times more questions than mediocre or poor negotiators. So I'm expecting the negotiators, the advocates, to be doing this, not just the mediator. It's going to be interesting to see how you do this. The best negotiators also zealously sought common ground. They actively, proactively looked for common ground. You know, the worst negotiators are rehearsing their arguments in their head. They're missing a lot of valuable, powerful information. And they assume that might is right and that aggression wins, which research does not show. So the best negotiators look for common ground. That doesn't mean they're not zealously advocating for themselves. They're able to do both. They're able to zealously advocate for their own interests. But for those of you who have studied integrative negotiations, simultaneously realizing that if the other party shares their interest, they have the ability, the capacity collaboratively together to create a better outcome than if they're fighting and at odds. Now, this isn't always a given, you know that, and you are simulating however you simulate, but I do want to see the effort. Doing insightful reframing of whatever the other says is something I would expect negotiators to do. And it may seem a little false if you're doing this via Blackboard, but you know, take the time. It doesn't hurt. It's good learning. It's good practice. The other thing that the best negotiators did, based on Rackham's research, is they actively created options for mutual gain. So they were highly creative in looking for win-win possibilities. Now, if you were taking negotiation tactics with me, you would know that you don't need to do this with the whole conflict. You can break it down into small agreements, into sub-issues. This is the real world. So I'm going to be looking for you to do this. You are trying to persuade, and I'm talking to the negotiators now. You are trying to persuade the other negotiators. And in my experience, what persuades best is a deep understanding of your opponents, excuse the language, but it gives you the picture, your opponent's interests, perspective. You must start not by arguing on your behalf. Certainly you can make your case, make a powerful case. But once you've done that, you must take the time to put yourself in the other negotiator's shoes and try to deeply understand them. Let me give you a couple of different real-world case studies to make this point. Years ago, when I was doing community education before I became a lawyer, before I was a mediator, I was facilitating dialogue, and I was creating community education curriculum. And a nonprofit approached me about, one of the groups, communities we were serving were adolescent girls. And this nonprofit approached me about persuading the parents of these girls to adopt sex education for obvious reasons. You know, we've got the polarized debate, pro-anti-choice in this country. And it's so sad because if we could go deeper, and when we do go deeper with the underlying issues, the underlying concerns and needs, there is so much more mutually beneficial possibility than when we're at that polarized, you know, attack and destroy, point the finger, just argue place. And here's an example. Now, at the time, the debate was sex education in the schools and in the public schools. And you know this debate continues. It's one of the reasons for the growth in all the private schools because depending on the faith of the family, there's very strong feelings that children should not be learning anything about sex in the schools. It should all be kept in the home. Parents need to pass on their family values. We've all lived through these debates. I tried to understand the deepest, most important concerns present in this debate. And I, in response, proposed a curriculum of where parents would enhance and learn how to better communicate with their children, understand, you know, what was honestly going on with their children, which in many families does not occur at adolescence puberty, and figure out ways that they could be passing on the information that their children needed. I don't have time to go into the details, but this was my way of walking down the middle and practicing NCRP with a highly polarized conflict. Let me give you another. I mentioned to you last week, and I've mentioned to you that I've worked very closely with the Department of the Interior. That included labor management, conflict, labor management mediation. And one of the cases, unfortunately, sad but true, the going postal does not just happen in the Postal Service. It happens in many different public agencies when somebody, a long-term employee, has been fired. Now, polarized rigid thinking, I was just talking to my engineering father about this, is that if somebody does not perform their job duties, they are fired. NCRP walking in the middle says, okay, but if the person you have fired meets the risk criteria of high risk of violence or going postal and is threatening violence, has an arsenal of guns and potential mental illness, you've got to explore possibilities in addition to terminating the employee. It's not just this or that, right? You need to explore complexity. And I was able in the Department of Interior, unfortunately, some of the engineers were very rigid, what I would call overly simplistic thinkers. It was either black or white, their way or no way. But I was able to find other engineers and ethics officers who appreciated that a terminated employee had some pressing, legitimate concerns that might be considered in a mediation, that there were other possibilities besides a civil suit, a lawsuit. And they were willing to explore possibilities, not to, and this is a polarized black-white way of thinking, to agree to bring the employee back. No. They could respect their own position, their own needs, their own interests, and simultaneously respect the employee. And thank God I was able to create a team of people to do this. And I'm happy to say there was no going postal incident. And I even had several members of the labor union that were terrified that this particular employee would actually shoot someone. I'm asking you in your simulations to attempt to do what I have done in these case studies, find a way to explore other possibilities and to negotiate a win-win respecting your most important interests, but not necessarily insisting, demanding on your positions. Reframe those positions, explore possibilities, explore common ground. Good luck.